This podcast is recorded on Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded.
Hello, welcome back to the Radical Online Leftist Pipeline podcast. Everyone's dead. I'm Jordan Vanden Lam.
I'm Celeste Little, and we are the key survivors of the apocalypse.
Yeah. So Mitch is out on a band tour. Check out his band. I think it's called Eye of the Enemy. Is that? Yeah, that's his band, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Tom is deceased.
Look, if it's not the name of Mitch's band, I can't look it up anyway because tech difficulties. So, Sorry, Mitch.
So, good day. We're recording in the morning again, so both of us are not at our prime, and we'll do our best. We wanted to, talk about a couple of things, including, I guess, Celeste, you wanted to talk about some civil ignorance in the country. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, look, the reason why this isn't my forefront, and essentially what I'm going to do to all of our fine listeners today is preach or rant to the converted. I do admit this, so I apologize. Feel free to skip forward about 5 minutes, but it's a bugbear. It's a bugbear of mine, and one that if people are following my public Instagram account, I put in, and it has to do with, well, there were a couple of instances. There was first the Guardian. They released this survey result thing that stated that most school students or most people leaving year 12 are woefully ignorant about the political system that we operate in. And how it works, particularly with regards to how we vote. And then there was, and apologies in advance, Abby Chatfield, but then there was social media videos from her trying to explain the political system and some pile on some backlash from that. But we've got an election coming up. I think everyone's aware that we've got an election coming up. I've got a bit piece coming up where I talk about how disillusioned I am, which is, to be fair, me every single election. But it just keeps dawning on me that it's not school kids that are woefully ignorant about the system we operate in. It's actually Australia at large. And I lost count now since the fallout of the referendum where I have stated clearly and plainly that, there is no way in the world Australia should have gone to vote at the referendum because not only was it the most offensive process that we could have potentially gone through, that just decimated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but it was clear to me back then that most Australians have no idea what the Constitution is. They have no idea how it operates. And they went and cast a vote on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights without even knowing what it was. The entire system was fueled by ignorance. And now with the standard federal election coming up, I'm seeing the same old arguments about, if you vote this way, your preferences will go this way. And it doesn't stack up. It doesn't stack up. So this is me essentially ranting and trying to get to people to maybe educate their peers a bit better on how things work. It's 2025 and grown adults shouldn't be regurgitating News Corp talking points about how if you vote for this independent or the Greens or something, your preferences are going to go to Liberal and redistribution. That is simply not how it works in our lower house. In the upper house, to a degree, that is how it works. You can,
But not really, because you still preference.
Well, you do still preference, but if people number one above the line and leave it there, then yeah, preferences can roll to undesirable candidates. So, not at a federal level at the same way that it has over the years at at a Victorian level, for example.
No, yeah, we don't have group voting tickets in the federal elections. We do have like that. That is true in Victorian elections in the upper house. If you preference one party first, they get to decide where your preferences flow. But it's just not the case for federal elections. Like if you preference Labor above the Liberal Party, even though they're bottom on the second last, and then Liberal is last, your preference will go to Labor before it goes to Liberals. It is just misinformation that is occurring.
Yeah, it's total misinformation, and to be honest, all people really need to keep in mind when voting on the Senate paper is if they are really keen about their preferences not going a certain way, then they can number below the line to make sure that their preference do not go a certain way. And I am the type of idiot who stands there and numbers all boxes from 1 to 143 or whatever is on the ballot, because I am that picky about it. I've done it for, as long as I've voted. So yeah, I just... partly it's a falling down in the education system, and considering
it's also intentional though by the Labor and the Liberal parties that it's to their benefit if we think that that's how it works. So
yeah, totally. It's perpetuated a lot of the time to maintain what is the power duality in this country, and people can start to think about things a little bit better, but they also just need to know that when it comes to the lower house, those things are straight out misinformation. Numbering 1 to 8 or whatever it is will make your preferences flow from 1 to 8 in your on your ballot. Yeah.
But also even in the upper house, like even if you vote above the line, your preferences will go where you put your preferences. It's not like we used to have group voting tickets where it didn't go that way and you just had to, number one, but that's just not how it works. It literally isn't. And I don't know. We see that their interests increasingly aligned between the Labor and Liberal Party, and it is, very hard to distinguish them from each other at the moment. Just kind of embarrassing. But then we see, every time I post something critical of the fucking Labor Party, I get attacked being like Liberal is worse. And it's like, yeah, well, we know that's the Labor government is spending millions and millions of dollars, making sure you're aware of that. It's not my job to do their advertising for them. Preference however the fuck you want. Obviously, VicSoc number one, and then Greens number 2. But yeah, that's just it's bullshit.
It just is. And I guess, when I'm really thinking about the power duality, there are also campaigns right now going on, having resources thrown at them specifically to state this one is worse than that one. That's the argument that we're getting. So, we, to a degree, we know that this one is worse than that one. You can look it up, but how much worse is up for debate. There is no way, if this was a state election, for example, rather than a federal, there is no way that I'd be going to the ballot box voting one for Victorian Labor here just because I'm worried about the other ones getting in. It's not going to happen. I've been really, really clear about my massive problem with Victorian, the current Victorian government and their focus on policing and policing everything that they possibly can. When it comes to the federal, if people are aiming for a more robust democracy, then then that whole "this one is worse than that one" is just a complete and utter moot point. Chuck a nice strong crossbench in there, force the lower house to engage in some robust negotiations and debate with each other to ensure that all angles of policy and legislation have been adequately democratized before they go up, and see where we end. Like that would be my ideal situation. But yeah.
No, I totally agree. I think, we need a bigger crossbench that, forces both parties to actually do something for the people that they're pretending to represent, instead of just doing, like, they vote, like 90% of the times they just vote together. Like, what's the difference between you? Like, obviously there are some differences, but they're just smaller and smaller differences every single year, which is, like, it is ridiculous. I was listening to a podcast by Batuta and Cos Samaris was on, discussing, Labor and stuff, and he's obviously a Labor member, but he's fairly openly critical of Labor, and in his words, like, what they've become and everything. In my words, I'd say they've always been like that. It's just being, like, it's increasingly easier to notice. But he was saying that politically, in this country, we are more politically engaged and aware than other countries, which is really surprising to me, considering how not that I reckon we are. But, like, I guess you can see, like, in America, like 40-something% of people actually vote, and their major parties spend most of their time trying to convince the people who are already voting, instead of, getting more people to vote for them. And, like, here we have compulsory voting, so the parties don't have to convince people to vote, at least any, like, they don't have to put any effort in there. But then, like, we see just like it. I reckon it's an intentional thing by Labor and Liberal to encourage like a political disengagement, because it benefits them, because they will just stay in power if people are disengaged. But it also is, a step away from any political education that is important in any political project, which they've just not done. And now, anytime, like even with the Medicare announcement, for example, the Liberal Party can take that, like, massive, election winning announcement, you can take the wind completely out of those sails by just saying, yeah, we'll do that too. Like, there's that, like, they are indistinguishable at this election, which is fucking nuts.
They are indistinguishable, and without that whole influence of I guess needing to appeal to crossbench and all of that, they're not required to pitch it in different ways that make it more attractive to sections of the community which they're not currently reaching. Like, I guess it does surprise me to hear that that they do think Australians are more politically engaged. I'm not discounting what Cos has said at all. I think that there's a lot of truth in that, but it doesn't mean we're engaged. It actually means we're so woefully ignorant, and there's other people in this world who are even worse off.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah, just it's the bar is very low, and somehow we've jumped over the bar despite it being on the floor. It is nuts. I think, like, something that I saw. So I'm a CPSU delegate, like at the federal level, not in Victoria, because I'm a federal public servant, and we had a delegates meeting on the election campaign that's coming up, and the CPSU is obviously affiliated with the Labor Party, and so in their election campaigns they're fairly partisan. It's pretty obvious, they admit that, but they were chatting about one of the things that they were trying to convince us to get other members to do was vote like obviously tell people to vote and campaign for the Labor Party because Peter Dutton will cut public service jobs and like obviously we're public servants. And I asked them, like, do you think this is going to be effective considering the Victorian Labor government has just announced that they're cutting public service jobs? Like, do you think that's going to work for us? Like, oh, Peter Dutton will cut your public service jobs, so will Labor. But Peter Dutton is worse because he's on the blue team. And they were like, yeah, it's like, as long as you put the Liberals last, that's kind of what matters for them. Which is so incredibly depressing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's unimaginative. It doesn't, like, I think I speak for all people on this podcast, including the dearly departed that we have today, when we say that we do spend an awful lot of time as activists, as theory people, as nerds, as whatever else we are collectively, imagining what a better system would look like. I think that a better system is on all of our radars, and it's certainly been on mine for the entirety of my adult life. But that whole the whole pragmatism and needing to negotiate this system until we've got everyone nicely lined up against the wall, there's a bit of time to buy before we've achieved a different system. So navigating it and making sure that I guess straight up making sure that we can actually navigate it like that in this current system should be what people take to the poll, because right now we can't navigate it. We do have the major parties. The major party power battle has been going on for decades, absolute decades, and people cannot imagine any other sort of way. But, sites like they vote for you and all of that have been highlighting for a very long time, for example, Labor and party dynamics and where some of their most repressive and disgraceful decisions have been made, where there's some sort of dissent within the Labor ranks, the MPs simply do not turn up to that vote and cast a vote. Like, they will be absent from the room while that vote is going on because personally they cannot agree with it, but publicly or for the sake of the party, if they oppose it, then they end up another Fatima Payman story. I guess that if people were more invested in this system, then perhaps we would get a few more Fatima Payman stories, and we would get people saying, morally, I cannot get behind this. I need to take a stand, and particularly with regards to the constituents that I represent, I need to be going back to them and seeing what it is that's going to impact their lives, change the lives of their families. There's always the discussion about working families, but, how many politicians are actually actively engaged in consulting with their working families on the ground? And how many of them are just going in there and voting along the line? I think also, if I'm honest about it, when it comes to the coalition, I've seen, particularly if a coalition politician's on their way out, and Christopher Pyne did this quite well. I kind of admired his career outro, regardless of where he ended up next. Because the closer he got to his retirement, the more that you saw him just going a bit rogue in the media or taking stands in the chamber that just did not align with what the party was taking to the table.
Yeah, becoming less of a fucking coward as he's about to lose his job. Like,
Yeah, and weirdly, I've seen Canavan doing similarly. Not quite as he doesn't quite have the charisma,
no pizzazz.
but yeah, I do wonder where he's at because he has taken stands against what his party's voting for. The Liberal and National Coalition does seem to allow for a little bit more of this.
Their dissent is more clear. Like they have which is ironic because like the Labor Party always goes on about solidarity and all that kind of shit, but when they're referring to solidarity, they mean ruling class solidarity, not with their rank and file, like with the payment shit. They were like, the Labor rank and file voted against, for Labor to take action on Israel's genocide in Gaza, and their ruling class members, the literal ruling class members in Parliament, said, "Nah, we're not gonna take action there." And then so Payman, showing solidarity with the actual rank and file, was like, "No, I'm voting against this or voting for this." I can't remember exactly which thing it was. Yeah, voted for the Greens motion.
Yeah, for the Greens and against the
but
the water down.
Exactly, and then the Labor Party goes like, nah. But then in the Libs and the Nats, they're bickering with each other over things that are important to their specific electorates, and like that's a regular thing that we see, and I think that's healthy, even though it's usually about something fucked, like wind turbines or whatever. But it is generally speaking a representation of their very conservative electorates, and they're representing their interests, and they have a fight. And it's nice to see. It's not fake, and it's not like pathetic little ruling class like bickering inside a cabinet room somewhere that no one gets to see.
Yeah, and I think you've just touched on yet another point. As progressives, what does solidarity actually look like to us, and what sort of solidarity do we want to see going on in our political systems? Is it solidarity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? Another notorious example, is it solidarity in the most conservative ways possible for the LGBTIQ population when it came to marriage equality? Like, how anyone who looks back at that, we were looking at one of the most conservative gains that the community could possibly get, and yet that was blocked for so long. Like, where was the solidarity there? Where's the solidarity for refugees? And in a lot of cases, where's the solidarity for working people? We've got to re-examine what solidarity looks like nowadays, particularly as the progressive side of politics talks more and more about intersectionality, but our systems don't really reflect that intersectionality at all. They reflect the status quo.
Yeah, and they'll continue to do so under capitalism. is my thesis. Something interesting from the German elections was, their relatively socialist, in quotation marks, party was the overwhelming winner amongst young people. And in Australia, we're also seeing that for young people, I think age like 16 to 24 or something like that, over 50% of people would identify with socialist policies or even as socialists. And that's pretty exciting. But then we're also seeing, particularly in Germany, that was only the most successful party amongst young people due to the women voting for them. The young men voted overwhelmingly for the fascist party, and that is really concerning to me. That is pretty fucked, and I was wondering if you had any ideas on what we do about that.
Yeah, and that was one example, but following the American election, we again saw the charts of like these Black women voting one way, Hispanic men voting another. There's a lot of that sort of analysis that goes on, and it tends to reflect over and over again that I don't know, the closest proximity that an individual voter has towards discriminated against or marginalized community, the more likely that they are to look at voting in a progressive way. I honestly think that those who do not have that proximity, that are not multiply marginalized people, but do identify with progressive thought, they need to look at that. They need to actually examine what's going on there, because what they are being sent is a very clear message about how people who are faced with a number of oppressions are reacting to what the status quo is, and therefore solidarity in that example would be, okay, so you feel like this system is discriminating against you because of this, and this, and you got these tangible examples of how this has impacted your life and your ability to live a life. Maybe I should be listening a little bit more to you and getting some more of your feedback. I gotta say, and I think as the sole Gen X on this podcast too, oh my God, what a bunch of sellout cunts Gen X have become. It's really depressing. So can people please hold on to their ideas of social justice and their want to change the world as they get older? I see those sorts of diagrams of these older populations, and Gen X is the main second oldest generation now. We never thought we'd make it past 27, but here we are.
You made it.
And and a good bunch of us are actually selling out to conservatism, which is definitely not what we were promoting when we were growing up. So it does suggest that there's this life cycle, and the more comfortable that people get in their privilege, the less likely they are to look at other people's disenfranchisement. And if you do care about community building, you're going to stop doing that shit.
Exactly. But like, how do we get that message across? I'm coming from a perspective where, not marginalized particularly, to say the least, but went to private schools in Sydney, like very expensive ones, and some of the behavior I saw at those private schools disgusted me. And I was like, this is pretty fucked. And then, have mates who've experienced some pretty horrific things. And that's been something that's radicalized me away from any conservatism and stuff like that. But how do we, what's the message to I guess, the young German men voting for AfD? What do we do? What's that? When it shouldn't be our responsibility, or particularly the responsibility of women, because they're the ones who overwhelmingly voted left compared to that AfD. But that is the reality of the world that we live in. It will become women's responsibility to do this, to change the people who are, doing the fucked things. And it just always has been. Even you take the October Revolution in Russia, it was the women who fucking dragged the men out onto the streets to do the revolution. It will always be the women doing this. So unfortunately, what do you reckon the women have to do here? Not that it should be that way for the record, but it will be. It just will be if there's going to be a change.
I mean, I spent a lot of time pondering this, and one key thing that you said there was that through the history and the reinforcement of history, a lot of that stuff ends up actually, those examples of the marginalized group, in that case women, being the ones who dragged out the others. That was even the same actually with the Gurindji and the Wavell walk-off, because they took action against the advice of their union, because the union was going for a better pay deal for white stock workers at the time, and they were scared that the Gurindji walk-off would threaten that deal. But what ended up happening was, they walked off anyway, and the rest of the union not only fell in line, but they were raising funds for it.
Supporting it eventually.
I think that a lot of those examples end up getting actually erased because there's the celebratory story, and then there's the reinforcement of the heroes within those sorts of stories. You know, whether it's men or whether it's Australia backing in or whatever else. The tales of those sorts of things do get wallpapered on and forgotten. I feel like perhaps what we need to do is, if we are appealing to those populations of younger men, actually do so. And I talk a lot about truth telling, but maybe what we do is based in processes of truth telling. It's actually, you know, the education of people so that they know that that things can actually be different, that there are these examples where things are different, and that those things are different because people actually took stands and wanted something better for other people. They were practicing solidarity in the face of overwhelming opposition, and in various ways they succeeded. I think that the status quo reinstates these mainstreamy sort of stories, and where these mainstream identities like white men feel threatened, they will reinforce those stories too. And to counteract it, we need to deconstruct it.
I just don't feel like we're there.
No.
Obviously I agree, but like, imagine, like, how do you go from, like, you know, young women in Germany voting overwhelmingly for the left, and then the opposite amongst young men? How do we get there? How do we do that? You can't teach empathy. You can't teach that kind of stuff. So, like, I don't know, like genuinely, like, fuck. we might be a bit fucked here. I'm a bit concerned.
Yeah, look, I think that what has happened in Germany is concerning regardless, and the fact that it has been mirrored in country after country over in Europe. Like, be concerned. Actually be concerned, and say, you know, no, we don't want to continue that here. I'm not going to say we want to stop that here, because Australia's got its own very racist and traditions, and it's also got a very, very long-term complicated relationship with fascism. And, you know, we need to be vigilant constantly.
I want to tell a story about something I did last night, which was, I went to a place called the Lilydale Youth Forum, I think. Yeah, Youth Foyer, sorry. Which is like a homelessness housing service for young people aged, I believe, 16 to 22, experiencing homelessness, to give them, you know, a place to live, and teach them life skills, and then enter, you know, secure housing eventually. And it was really cool. I got to meet a whole bunch of them last night. They, like, the young people were the ones who asked the youth workers for me to come, which is really exciting because I wanted to have a chat. And I went there. The places that they live in are owned by CHL, which I hate, and so do they, and so do the workers there, because they're kept in some moderate state of disrepair, but they're, like, obviously it's a house, so certainly better than being homeless. But what they're doing, you know, by supporting these kids, giving them a place to live, and teaching them the life skills and stuff to then move on and be able to support themselves and then the rest of their community. Like, there were people who'd left the program who were coming back for this dinner. It was really cool seeing that community build, and, like, such a diverse range of backgrounds. Obviously, like, you know, not great backgrounds, but still amongst that kind of background, a significantly diverse one. But the workers themselves were like, this is great. What we're doing here is great. And I know I've seen that kind of work done really badly. And this was the exact opposite of this. But the workers are like, what are we supposed to do when there's nowhere for these people to go after this? Because that's where we're at now. And that was pretty depressing, because you see the gains made for these young people, and then like, what hope do they have? Like, literally, what are we supposed to do there? That was it was cool. It was really cool to catch up with them.
A little bit change of tack, but I'm going to throw a couple of things that in the wheelhouse that you're pretty well known for to you. So the past week, for example, there's been, I think it was an ABC article, and it was talking about Lismore and the housing there that had been absolutely decimated by the flood instances, and how squatters have moved into those areas. The houses themselves, once they had been, flood destroyed, were bought up by the government, but then been allowed to sit there and kind of rot. And, people who had been living in all sorts of circumstances, whether they were displaced people from their houses in Lismore in the first place, or they're, hippies that have decided that, that they want to go and live in a squat community, or long-term homeless people from anywhere else. They have taken up residence in those places. They've formed a community. They've like, despite having the water cut off to their the properties that they'd squatted in, they've gone and reconnected it and built veggie patches. I was reading that, and I was going, I mean, for starters, I was pretty happy it was happening in Lismore, because we hear about those sorts of, that area an awful lot when it comes to those sorts of progressive living conditions. But the fact that houses had just been allowed to stand there for so long, and people are expected to not move in and to not form a community and to not support each other. I mean, and hearing a counsellor talk about how dangerous it is, but what's more dangerous at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. Like, grow up.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring to see. It makes me so happy. Like, I was across it when it started. They have a little Instagram account and stuff like that, and it's really cool. But yeah, like, once again, empty homes, people without homes. Like, it's just like I went on Q&A on Monday, and I was like, what are you gonna fucking do? And then Albo's like, and I was asking about the immediate term, because it's like, what are we gonna do now? Because people are fucked now. And Albo bangs on about it's a supply issue and whatever, and like, that's just not correct. It is not a supply issue. Like, we have in metropolitan Melbourne alone, excluding properties owned by corporations, excluding properties in holiday destinations like the Mornington Peninsula, which is technically Metro Melbourne, but it was excluded from this report, excluding empty properties owned by the government. We had 100,000, almost 100,000 empty or underutilized home in the metropolitan area. And then in the entire country, in the entire state, at the last census, there was 30,000 people experiencing homelessness. So that's like, one house can house more than one person on average. But if we have 3 times as many empties in metropolitan Melbourne alone than the people experiencing homelessness across the entire state, we do not have a supply problem. We have a distribution problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's absolutely it. Like, increasing the supply of unaffordable homes is not going to address this issue. We need to distribute the existing ones that we have already, like they're doing in Lismore, and like we can do down here in Melbourne, and solve a couple really important issues, like immediately, in the immediate term, instead of waiting 20 years for the government to build fucking more expensive homes and not do anything for us in the meantime. It's infuriating. It's fucking... And, like, he went on about, like, what was it? He's talking about the half. And the shit that he was talking about was all the stuff that the Greens amendments introduced. Like, the most significant investment in public and affordable housing this country's ever seen. Like, yeah, that was not going to be there unless the Greens delayed it, and he complained about it being delayed, of course, in the same breath. In the fucking same breath. Oh, it's delayed in the Senate or whatever the fuck. And it's like, do you not see yourself? Do you seriously? But yeah, like, go squat some houses, pretty much. If you're in Lismore, go squat in a house. Like, if you need it, obviously don't do it if you're fine. That's kind of defeats the purpose. That's not redistributing anything.
Nah, good luck to all of them up in Lismore, and perhaps we'll find their handles so that people can have a look and see what they're doing.
Yeah, we'll find it and chuck it in the show notes, because that's, it's really cool. And then also, to counter that kind of optimism, Moreton Bay City Council has decided to criminalise homelessness, criminalise the, like, camping by people experiencing homelessness on public land. And then in their little press release, they said this would benefit the homeless population. Like, how the fuck does further criminalising poverty and homelessness benefit anyone except people profiting from prisons and police and weapons companies that are increasingly profiting from our militarized police and shit like that. Like, this is not benefiting the homeless population as they described it. Like, fuck off.
Yeah. I think, there's always, whether it's as blatant as that or it's little sort of passive aggressive measures that a council will take. For example, the rails on benches, stopping people from sleeping, off the ground so that they can be warmer and that. Those little infrastructural things that they do to continually demonize those sleeping rough. A long time ago, I don't know how long ago it was actually, but I remember there was the example that came out of, I think it was Utah, in the USA, where one of the most red areas of the country decided we might actually house people and give them enough to live on and see how that goes. And in giving people quality housing with support and social workers on hand and all of that sort of stuff, they actually saved a shit ton of money doing that, because they weren't spending big bucks on criminalizing the most disadvantaged peoples in our communities. Like, anytime you hear about the criminalization of homeless people, I think that people need to get a little bit more robust in their questioning of like, if budget is one of the things that gets you over the line when it comes to voting for a party, maybe sit there and question what it is that your tax dollars are being spent on when it comes to homeless populations and those at the bottom of the rungs. Every time a measure to criminalize people like that goes up, you can bet that your money is being spent in ways that you wouldn't agree with.
Exactly. And, like, that's the thing. Even from a capitalist perspective, we know that the data and all the studies show that if you actually address homelessness and poverty, it saves you a shit ton of money in the long term and almost in the short term too. It's not like you're not spending money on prisons, you're not spending money on police, you're not spending money on hostile architecture. You just spend a little bit of money making sure that someone has a home and then they get a job. That's how it works. That's literally what the data shows. And then for capitalism, then they become a wage slave for the rest of their life. And that's a benefit. And then they contribute to the economy. So, like, even for a capitalist, it makes sense to solve homelessness. But also, if you do solve homelessness, then capitalism has no threat. There's nothing to keep us all from being wage slaves, because there's no one to point to and say, hey, if you don't just do what we tell you to for the rest of your life, you'll become like that person who's sleeping rough. So there is a little, contradiction in capitalism that keeps this from occurring and keeps them spending so much money on it. But from an economic perspective, even a neoliberal economic perspective, it makes sense to fucking put people in homes. That's just how it works. And then also it like increases the nationalism in that person, because it's like, look what the state has provided for me, a home. I've got something to protect now, and I'll protect the interests of the state because they did something good for me. It's just good capitalist policy to house people. So the fact that they're not even doing good capitalist policy as capitalists makes me fucking so confused at the moment.
Yeah. I hear ya.
Hang on, I am just going to confirm that Mitch's band name is I've the Enemy. Pretty sure it is. Yeah, I've the Enemy. I've listened to them.
So have I.
They're good. Yeah. They have a Bread and Roses reference in one of the songs, and it's my favourite for sure. All right, let me do the outro. Anyways, thanks for listening to the Radical Online Leftist Pipeline podcast 0.5, because we're half the team down. But Mitch is probably going to do an outro here that's way better than mine. So I hope he inserts this one too, because the comparison will be quite nice, I reckon. Give Mitch's band, I Have the Enemy, a listen, and we'll play one of their songs as an outro here.
When what we lose is not our lives, but our dignity.